After everything this family has done for you, my father said, this is how you give back? He did not raise his voice. He never raises his voice. That is the thing about my father, Dr. Rees Martin Hale. The thing that every patient, every neighbor, every person who has ever sat across from him in a waiting room or a church pew will tell you first. His voice is always the calmest thing in the room. And standing there in my parents' dining room on that Sunday afternoon, watching him slide a manila folder across the table toward me, I understood for the first time that calm is not the same as safe. The folder stalked at my end of the table. I did not touch it. My mother had placed tea in front of each of us when I arrived. The cups were the white ones with the small blue flowers, the ones she only used for company. And I remember thinking that was strange, being treated like company in a house I had grown up in. The smell of the cedar wood polish my father uses on the dining room furniture every Sunday hung in the air, heavy and particular. His pen clicked. Once. Twice. He did it without looking at it, the way people do when their hands need something to hold. My mother's hand came down briefly on my forearm, warm, soft, there and gone, and I could not tell if she was comforting me or bracing me. My sister Brianna was already seated when I walked in. She had not texted me that she would be here. The folder was already on the table when I arrived, face down, which meant the meeting had a shape before I entered it. We thought it would be good to have a family conversation, my mother Carolyn said. She smiled at me in that way she has, the smile that means she has already decided something and would like me to arrive at the same conclusion on my own. Your father has something he'd like to share. I am a doctor. I have been a doctor for 3 years now, attending physician at Mercy General Internal Medicine. I spend my working hours in a world where information is withheld for reasons, where the way someone phrases a sentence can tell you as much as the sentence itself. I know what it looks like when a conversation has been prepared in advance. I know what it looks like when the person sitting across from you already knows how it ends. My father knows this about me. He trained me in his way. He always said the best doctors listen more than they speak. He was listening now, watching me, pen clicking in his hand. Brianna is in a difficult position, he said. You know that. We all know that. She has been trying to establish herself, and it has been harder than any of us expected. He paused just long enough to let me register that Brianna herself was not speaking, was sitting with her hands folded on the table like someone waiting for a verdict to be read on her behalf. Your mother and I have been thinking about how the family might help, and I think there is a way we can do that. A real way, something that would give her a foundation. He nodded toward the folder. There is an opportunity, he said, for you to give your sister your house. There was the pen, still clicking. There was the cedar smell. There was the particular weight of the silence in that room, which was not empty silence, but full silence, the kind that has been planned. My mother did not react, which meant she already knew. Brianna looked at the table, which meant she already knew. I put both my hands flat on the table without touching the folder. My house. The one I bought 3 years ago with money I had saved during residency, money I had kept separate and deliberate and entirely my own. $800,000 in property, in a neighborhood I had chosen myself, in a city where I had built a life that no one had helped me build. Mine, in the specific way that very few things in my life had ever been mine. I'm sorry, I said. Can you say that again? My father looked at me with an expression I had seen him use with patients who were frightened and needed steadying. Patient, warm, completely in control of the conversation. I'm not asking you to be left with nothing, Claire. This would be a gift to your sister from you. It would be structured appropriately. You would be compensated over time in a way that makes sense for everyone. He opened his hands, the gesture he makes when he is explaining something reasonable. You are a physician. You earn a good income. You can build again. Brianna does not have what you have. That was always going to be true, and we have not done right by her in acknowledging it. I have a mortgage, I said, which we would handle. Dad, Claire. He said my name the way he always says it, level, final, like a door closing quietly. You have spent your whole life receiving from this family, your education, your opportunities, your start. I co-signed your medical school loans when no one else would have because I believed in you and because that is what family does. I am asking you now to believe in your sister the same way. The co-signing. He had mentioned it before, once or twice over the years, always in the same tone, offered not as a ledger entry but as a proof of love. I had always received it as love. I sat there and I let myself receive it that way again because I did not yet know what I know now, which is that there is a version of love that is not love at all, but something that only resembles it from far enough away. I picked up my tea. I did not drink it. The cup was warm. My mother leaned forward. "Sweetheart, I know this is a lot to take in, but your father and I have been watching Brianna struggle for a long time, and we have not known how to help her in a way that would really stick. This would stick. This would give her something real." She reached across the table and touched the folder lightly with 2 fingers, not pushing it, just touching it. "We're not asking you to make a decision today. We just want you to look." I looked at Brianna. She was still looking at the table. "Brianna," I said. She looked up. There was something in her face I did not have a word for then. Not guilt, not eagerness. Something smaller and harder to name, like someone who has been told a thing is necessary and has decided to believe it. "Do you want my house?" I said. The question landed in the room like a stone in water. My father's pen went still. My mother's hand tensed on the folder. "That's not really how we'd like to frame it," my father said. "I'm asking Brianna." Brianna looked at me for a moment. Then she looked at our father. Then she looked back at the table. "We think it's the right thing," she said, "for the family." My father slid the folder another inch toward me. "Take it home," he said. "Read it. Think about it. I know this feels sudden, but I want you to understand, Claire, that this is not a request we make lightly. This comes from a place of real love for both of you. You have always been the one in this family with the capacity to hold more. That has always been true. It is not a burden. It is a gift." He said it softly. That was the part that stayed with me afterward, through the drive home and the untouched tea and the voice memo I recorded sitting in my car in my own driveway, because I needed to hear myself think out loud, not the ask itself, not the folder, the softness of his voice when he said it, the absolute lack of doubt in him, the way the room arranged itself around his certainty, my mother's hands, my sister's silence, the cedar smell, the clicking pen. Like a table set for a meal I had not known I was attending, I pressed my thumb into the inside of my left wrist. I could feel my pulse there, even and steady, the way it always was. I had trained myself to find it in emergencies, in the first months of residency when the noise of a trauma bay threatened to pull me under. Find your pulse first, everything else follows. I picked up the folder. I did not open it. "I'll read it," I said. My father nodded, and the warmth in his expression was so complete, so familiar, so exactly the face I had been trusting my entire life, that I almost stopped there. I put the folder in my bag. I said goodbye to my mother. I kissed my father on the cheek because that is what we did. That is what we have always done. And his cheek was warm and he smelled like the cedar polish, and he squeezed my shoulder once as I turned to go. I was almost at the door when my father called after me. "It means something, you know, that you're the one we can ask this of." I turned back. He was watching me from the head of the table, pen in hand, the picture of a man who has never in his life had a reason to doubt himself. "It means we trust you," he said. "It means we know who you are." Brianna did not look up. I left. My father stepped away to take a call a few minutes before that, while I was still standing in the hallway with my bag, and in those 30 seconds the dining room went quiet. I looked back through the doorway. Brianna was sitting at the table alone. She looked up and found my eyes across the distance between us, and for one moment that lasted maybe half a second, something crossed her face that was not composure and was not strategy. It was something that recognized what was happening. She knew exactly what had been asked of me. I could see that she knew. And then the moment passed and she looked away, and when my father returned she was already rearranged and the room resumed the shape it had been holding. I drove home with the folder on my passenger seat. I did not open it. I sat in my car in the driveway for 11 minutes. I know it was 11 minutes because I watched the numbers on the dashboard change, a thing I do when I am waiting for my own thoughts to organize themselves. My house was dark. I had left the porch light on that morning, the way I always did on Sundays, and it lit the front steps and the small rosebush I had planted the first spring I lived there. That house. He wanted me to give them that house. I picked up my phone, found the voice memo app, and pressed record. Sunday, just left my parents. There was a meeting. Dad asked me to give Brianna my house. He presented it as a family decision. Mom was there. Brianna was there. Nobody raised their voice. The folder is on my seat. I haven't opened it. I paused. The porch light held steady. I don't know why I'm recording this. I think I need to hear it out loud before I can figure out what I actually think. I stopped the recording. Then I picked up the folder, put it in my bag, got out of the car, and went inside. The folder sat on my kitchen counter for 4 days. I thought around it. I was aware of its presence, the way you are aware of a sound in another room that you keep deciding is nothing. Monday morning, I was at the hospital by 6:15, the hallway still dim and quiet, with the particular stillness of a building that has been running all night and is about to change shifts. I was at the nurse's station reviewing overnight labs when a voice behind me said, "Claire, is that Martin Hale's daughter?" I turned. It was a colleague of mine, colleague of mine, Sandra Osei, a hospitalist I had worked alongside for 2 years. She was smiling in the way people smile when they are about to say something pleasant about someone you love. "He was at the gala last month," she said. "I had the most wonderful conversation with him. I told my husband that man is everything a physician should be. 30 years of practice and he still talks about his patients like their family." She shook her head. "You must be so proud." "He's wonderful," I said. The words came out smooth and immediate, shaped by practice. Sandra moved on. I turned back to the labs. The folder was still on my counter when I got home that night. 2 days later, I was running an errand near my parents' neighborhood. I was waiting for the pharmacist when I heard my name, and I turned to find Eleanor Marsh standing near the vitamin aisle. A small woman in her early 70s with white hair cut close to her head and reading glasses pushed up onto her forehead. I had met her perhaps a dozen times over the years, always at my parents' house or at the church they attended, the kind of face that belongs permanently to the landscape of your childhood. "Claire," she said, with that particular warmth of someone who associates you entirely with better things than your current context. "How wonderful. How are you? How is your father?" "He's well," I said. "Good, actually. Busy as ever. He is such a blessing." She said it simply, the way you say something you have said many times and have not stopped meaning. I don't know what I would have done without him these past few years. Since Robert passed, she touched the sleeve of her cardigan. "He's been so kind, helping me sort through all the paperwork. You know how it is when a husband handles everything for so long. You don't even know what you don't know." "I'm glad he's been able to help," I said. "Oh, he's been wonderful. Above and beyond, really." She patted my arm. "You're very lucky, you know, to have a father like that." "I know," I said. She moved on toward the checkout. I stood for a moment in the vitamin aisle and thought about how Eleanor Marsh looked when she talked about my father. Nothing guarded in her face. Nothing withheld. Just the open warmth of someone who trusted a person completely and had been given no reason not to. I knew that expression. I had worn it myself for 32 years. I picked up my prescription and drove to my parents' house. My father was with a patient. My mother let me in and told me he would be another 20 minutes, and I said I could wait in the study. The study smelled like him, like the cedar oil on the bookshelves, like the particular brand of soap he had used since before I could remember. The desk was very orderly. He was meticulous about the desk. I had grown up understanding that the desk was not a place I touched. Not because he had ever said so directly, but because I had absorbed the information, the way you absorb rules communicated through the quality of a person's stillness. I set the folder down on the desktop and stood there for a moment. On the wall behind the desk were his diplomas, his board certifications. Beside them, a framed quotation he had put up when I was in high school. "A good person does the right thing, even when it is hard." I looked at the locked drawer, the lower left one. It had been locked as long as I could remember, and for as long as I could remember, I had simply understood it as one of his qualities. Discretion. Privacy. A doctor's most important virtue, he had told me once, is the ability to hold other people's information without being changed by it. I had written that down in a notebook when I was 16. I thought he meant professionally. I had never considered that it might apply more broadly. I left the folder on the desk and went back to the living room. He came out of his home office 20 minutes later and saw me, and his face arranged itself into something warm and pleased. "Claire, I didn't know you were coming by." I brought the folder back, I said. I needed to think about it more before I could read it properly. He nodded slowly. He did not look concerned. That's fine. There's no rush. He sat down in the armchair across from me. I know it was a lot to put on the table at once, but the timing is somewhat pressing, so we wanted to put everything out there. What kind of timing? I said. Nothing you need to worry about, he said. Just family logistics. The kind of thing that has a window. I looked at him. He looked back with that expression that was warmth and certainty in the same proportions they had always been, and I wanted to push, and I did not push. I went home. That night I stood in my kitchen with my phone in my hand and opened my contacts and found my father's name. His name with a small circle next to it that meant he was a favorite. I put the phone face down on the counter. My thumb had not moved toward the call button. I left the phone on the counter and went to bed and lay awake thinking about the word timing. The next morning, on my drive to the hospital, I caught myself describing the family meeting in the same language I used for difficult patient situations, measured, specific, noting what was said and what was not. I noted the word timing. I noted that the folder had been on the table before I arrived. Patrick Seo was in the break room when I arrived, standing at the coffee machine with the specific expression he had in the first 15 minutes of his shift, which was not quite alert yet, but was paying attention. We had worked together for 2 years. He was thorough and quiet, and he had the particular quality I trusted most in a colleague, which was that he never told you what he thought you wanted to hear. You look like you slept wrong, he said. Family thing, I said. I poured myself coffee. I stood at the counter and thought about not saying anything else. Then I said, my father asked me to give my sister my house. Patrick turned and looked at me. He did not feel silence. He framed it as a family decision, I said. A gift. He mentioned the co-signing on my med school loans as context. There's some kind of timing issue he didn't explain. My sister didn't say much. My mother was there. I stopped. I don't know what I think about it. Patrick was quiet for a moment. He looked at his coffee. Is this a family problem, he said, or a financial one? I opened my mouth and said, family. It came out immediately, the way a reflex comes out. Patrick looked at me. I'm not sure those are different things, he said. He picked up his coffee and walked out. I stood there and let the sentence sit in the air where he had left it. I went to see my patients, a woman whose chart told a longer story if you knew how to read it. A man with a medication interaction 3 previous physicians had missed because each had only looked at one half of his records. I let the evidence speak for itself. The folder was still on my counter when I walked in, 4 days, and I still had not opened it. I was beginning to understand that the version of this situation I was waiting for did not exist. My father called on a Thursday evening just after 7 while I was eating dinner, standing at the kitchen counter the way I did when I was tired enough that sitting down felt like a commitment I could not keep. I wanted to check in, he said, see how you were feeling about things. That was how he always started. Not have you read it or what did you decide, but how are you feeling, as though the conversation were a wellness check and his only concern was my emotional state. I had heard him use that opening with patients. It was very effective. I've looked at it, I said. This was not entirely true. I had looked at the outside of the folder several times. I had moved it from the counter to the kitchen table to the side table near the front door. I had not opened it. Good. And what are your thoughts? I have some questions, I said. A pause. Brief, but present. Of course you do. That's exactly right. Why don't you come for dinner Saturday? We can talk it through properly. Your mother is making that lamb you like. My mother's lamb. She made it for birthdays, for homecomings, for moments she wanted to feel ceremonial without calling them ceremonies. I understood what dinner Saturday meant. It meant there would be another version of Sunday, set at a table with better food and the same expectation. Saturday works, I said. Good, he said. And then, quietly, the way he said things that were meant to land without seeming to be aimed. We appreciate your patience with this, Claire. We know it's not a small ask. We just also know that it's the right thing for everyone. I said goodnight. I put the phone on the counter. I stood there for a moment looking at the folder. I opened it. The top sheet was the property transfer document exactly as I had expected. My address, my name as current owner, a secondary party listed as Brianna Ann Hale. The language was standard. There were several pages of supporting documentation, deed information, title history, All the expected materials for a property transfer of this kind. I read through them. I set each page aside in order. I was nearly at the bottom of the stack when I found the other page. It had been placed behind the deed copy, slipped in at an angle as though it had been tucked there quickly, or had migrated from a different document entirely. The paper was thicker than the rest, a different stock, with a letterhead at the top that I did not recognize. The firm name was Price Estate and Financial Services. The address was local. The date at the top was 3 weeks before the Sunday my father had called us to the table. I read the first paragraph. Then I read it again. The letter referenced a private lending arrangement. It described a 60-day window for the completion of a property transfer. It named a specific address, which was my address. It described the property as collateral against a short-term financial arrangement and noted that documentation confirming the transfer would be provided upon completion by the asset holder's daughter. Asset holder's daughter. I stood at my kitchen table and read the paragraph a third time, and the words did not change. The date did not change. 3 weeks before the Sunday, 3 weeks before my father had sat at the head of the table and explained to me that this was a family decision, a gift, an opportunity to do the right thing for my sister. 3 weeks before, he had looked me in the face and said, "We just want you to look." He had not been asking me at that table. He had been informing me of a transaction that was already in progress. My consent had been assumed. My signature was an outstanding detail in an arrangement that had already been made. I picked up my phone. My hands were completely steady, the way they were in the trauma bay when the situation was serious enough that steadiness stopped being a choice and became the only available option. I photographed the letter. I checked the photograph to make sure the text was legible. I set the phone face down on the table. Then I put every page back in the folder in the order I had found it, including the extra page behind the deed copy at the same angle. And I closed the folder and set it on the table exactly where it had been. I did not call my father. I did not call my mother. I went to the cabinet and filled the kettle and put it on the stove and stood there waiting for it to boil. When the tea was ready, I sat down at the table with the mug in front of me and my phone with its photograph of a letter that had not been meant for me to find. The thing I kept coming back to was the date. Not the language, not the collateral designation, not the 60-day window. The date. 3 weeks before. He had already made the arrangement. He had already told someone that his daughter would provide the documentation upon completion. He had already used the word daughter in a legal context, in a letter I was never supposed to read, before he had ever said the words to my face. The Sunday meeting had not been the beginning. It had been the closing, and I was supposed to have agreed by now. I pressed my thumb into the inside of my left wrist. My pulse was there even, unhurried, a fact beneath the skin that did not have an opinion about anything. I picked up my phone and opened the voice memo app. "Thursday evening," I said. My voice came out level and clinical. "I found something. I need to figure out what it means before I do anything." I looked at the folder. There was a page in the folder I was not meant to see. It references a lending arrangement. The date on it is 3 weeks before the family meeting. My property is described as collateral. I stopped. I don't know what I'm going to do yet. I need to think. I stopped the recording. I sat with my tea until it went cold. I thought about my father at the head of the table, pen clicking, voice level, watching me with the face of a man who had already closed the deal and was simply waiting for the paperwork to be signed. I was still sitting there when my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. She had sent a photograph of the table set for Saturday, the good cloth out, candles in the middle. "Looking forward to seeing you, sweetheart. Dad is excited to talk things through." I set the phone face down again. The phone rang 2 days later. My Uncle Raymond, my father's younger brother, calling on a Friday afternoon in the quiet way he did every few weeks. Raymond was the kind of man who called people. He was 57 years old, and he had been calling me since I was in college. Brief calls, nothing particular. The kind of calls that existed to maintain a frequency rather than to say any specific thing. I was in my car in the hospital parking structure when he called, just finished with a 12-hour shift, eating the last of a granola bar I had been carrying in my coat pocket since 11 that morning. "How are you doing, kid?" he said. "Tired," I said. "Long week." "You work too hard," he said. "How are your folks? Saw your dad at Christmas, but we haven't talked much since." "They're fine," I said. Busy. Yeah, Raymond said. And then the way people say things that belong to a different conversation, things that slip through a gap between what they meant to say and what came out. He's got a lot on his plate right now with the practice, from what I understand. I hope he's not pushing himself too hard. There was a small silence. I could tell he heard it. I could tell from the way his sentence trailed slightly that he had registered the moment after the words left his mouth. Anyway, he said, how's the hospital? He moved on. We talked for another 10 minutes about my hospital and his neighbor's fence and a book he had been reading. He did not circle back. I said goodbye and sat in my car afterward with the granola bar wrapper in my hand and the phrase "a lot" on his plate, sitting in the space behind my sternum where things lodged when they were waiting to be understood. Raymond had said, from what I understand, which meant someone had told him something. He had heard it from somewhere more private, and the fact of his hearing it had come out of him involuntarily on a routine phone call, and he had noticed what he had done and corrected immediately. A lot on his plate. A 60-day window, an arrangement already in progress. I drove home. The folder was on the table where I had left it. Saturday was tomorrow, and my mother had sent a second text that afternoon, just a heart, the kind she sent when she was thinking about me and wanted me to know. I sat down at the table and looked at the folder for a long time and thought about everything I now held in my mind that I had not held 5 days ago. The word timing, which my father had used and not explained. The phrase, a lot on his plate, which Raymond had let slip and immediately reclaimed. The letter with the date that preceded the meeting by 3 weeks. The asset holder's daughter, which was me, named in a document I was never supposed to read, in a financial arrangement whose terms I had never agreed to. I had found something, and I could not unfind it. I did not sleep well that night. I lay in the dark in my house, which was my house, and I thought about a letter that had been written 3 weeks before anyone had the courtesy to ask me. Saturday dinner was lamb and roasted potatoes and my mother's good tablecloth, the ivory one she ironed herself and kept in the cedar chest. She had lit the 2 white candles in the silver holders that had belonged to her mother. She had put fresh flowers in the low vase at the center of the table, yellow ones, the kind she ordered when she wanted the room to feel like a welcome. Brianna was not there. I noticed that before I noticed anything else. She had something come up, my mother said, in the easy way she explained Brianna's absences, which had always been explained this way, the way weather was explained, as a condition rather than a choice. My father poured wine. He asked about a patient case I had mentioned 3 weeks ago. He had been holding the detail, carrying it the way he carried information that might be useful later. We ate dinner and talked about things that were not the folder. It was only when my mother cleared the dinner plates and brought out the coffee that my father set his forearms on the table and looked at me with the expression I had been waiting for since I walked through the door. So, he said. So, I said, have you had a chance to look at the documents more carefully? I've looked at them, I said. He had the patience of a man who had spent 30 years sitting across from people in difficult moments and understood that silence was a tool, that most people would fill it with something he could use. I had spent 10 years in medicine. I had learned the same thing. I let the silence sit. And, he said finally, I have questions about the letter, I said, the one from Price Estate and Financial Services. Something moved in his face. Not the flinch of someone caught. Something smaller and more controlled, the fractional adjustment of a person who has encountered an unexpected variable and is already calculating how to account for it. That was a document that shouldn't have been in that folder, he said. That was an administrative error, an oversight. It had my address in it, I said. It described my property as collateral. It was a preliminary communication, he said, about a financial arrangement that was contingent on your agreement. Nothing has been finalized. Nothing can be finalized without your signature. The date on it was 3 weeks before you called us to the table, I said. We were exploring options, he said. That's all. We wanted to understand what was possible before we had the conversation with you. That's prudent, Claire. That's responsible planning. My mother was very still at the other end of the table. She was holding her coffee cup with both hands and looking at a spot just to the left of my father's shoulder, the way she looked when she was listening to a conversation she had already decided not to enter. The letter said 60 days, I said. It said documentation would be provided upon completion by the asset holder's daughter. It's legal language, my father said. You know how attorneys write things. The asset holder's daughter, I said again. That's me. Claire. He said my name the way he always said it when he wanted the conversation to change direction. Level. Final. I understand that finding that letter was confusing. I understand that it raised questions. But what I am asking you to hear, clearly, is that nothing in our relationship is transactional. Nothing in this family operates on those terms. What we are asking of you is an act of love for your sister, full stop. Whatever preliminary paperwork was drafted by an attorney is not the substance of what we are asking. I looked at my father's face. I had been looking at it my entire life. I knew every variation of its expressions, knew the difference between the warmth he showed publicly and the warmth he showed privately, knew the look he used when he was managing a situation versus the look he used when he was genuinely present in one. I was looking at the first kind now. I had always known the difference. I had simply never let myself name it before. I need more time, I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. Of course, he said. Of course you do. We're not trying to pressure you. He reached across the table and briefly covered my hand with his. We love you. That's what this is. Please don't let an attorney's careless paperwork make you think otherwise. I drove home with the name Warren Price sitting at the front of my mind like an address I had not yet visited. I researched him on Sunday morning. His website communicated discretion rather than visibility. Estate planning. Private consultations. 22 years in practice. No photograph. I searched the county court records. A few routine estate filings, all closed. He did not leave a large footprint. I clicked on images. There were 4 results. 3 were stock photographs from a generic business directory. The 4th was a candid shot from what I recognized immediately as the Mercy General Annual Gala, the one the hospital held every October in the ballroom of the Westfield Hotel. I had attended twice. My father attended every year. The photograph was 4 years old. In it, a man in a dark suit stood at the edge of a small group, holding a champagne glass, turned slightly toward the man beside him. He was perhaps 60 years old, with a kind of unremarkable face that was easy to look past in a photograph. The man beside him was laughing at something, his hand lifted in a gesture of emphasis. I had seen that gesture thousands of times. I had watched it across dinner tables and hospital corridors and Sunday family meetings. My father and Warren Price. 4 years ago. Looking the way people look in photographs when they have known each other long enough that a camera does not change how they hold themselves around each other. I sat with that photograph for a long time. I let it be what it was, which was evidence of a relationship that predated by years the preliminary communication that had slipped into a folder by an administrative error. On a Tuesday afternoon between patients, my phone buzzed with an automated text from a company called Clearview Title Services. A preliminary filing had been submitted regarding a property at my address. I sat very still. I logged into the portal. It was a property transfer notification. The submitting party was listed as a representative acting on behalf of Martin Hale. My father had filed this before the family meeting, before he sat at the head of the table and asked me to give him the right thing. I was still in the position of believing I had not yet been asked. I looked at the date on the filing. I looked at it for a long time. Then I closed the portal and did not move for several minutes. My property, filed. Before he asked me. He had not been waiting for my answer. He had been waiting for my signature. And every conversation since that Sunday, every dinner invitation and quiet voice and reference to family love and what do you think and there's no rush, had been the management of an interval, not a genuine openness to my decision. I called my mother that evening, not because I had decided anything, because she called first, and I answered the way I always did. I just wanted to check in, she said. Lightly, the way you say things you have rehearsed into sounding unrehearsed. We haven't talked much this week. I'm fine, I said. Brianna is really struggling, she said, her voice softened. She would never have agreed to this if she didn't genuinely need it. We just need you to decide. I know you'll do the right thing. You always do. I'm still thinking, I said. In the morning, I got up early and drove to the hospital before my shift started and found Patrick in the break room. I had been measuring out what to tell him since Saturday. I had been deciding in small increments, the way you decide things that cost you something, checking the decision each morning to see if it still held. "I need to show you something," I said. He turned from the coffee machine and looked at me. He had the quality I had always valued in him, which was that when you said something that required his full attention, he gave it without making you ask twice. I opened the photograph on my phone and held it out to him. He looked at it. He read the visible text carefully, the way he read patient charts, going through it once and then going through it again. "Where did this come from?" he said. "It was in the folder my father gave me," I said. "It was behind the deed documentation. I don't think it was meant to be there." Patrick looked at the date. He looked at it the same way I had looked at it, with the same quiet professional attention he gave to information that changed a clinical picture. "And the title filing?" I said. "He submitted a preliminary transfer notification on my property before the meeting." Patrick set the phone down on the counter and looked at me. "Claire," he said, and then, without any drama, in exactly the tone he used when he was naming something a patient's family had been calling by the wrong name for too long, "This is not a family problem. This is a financial crime." The word crime sat in the air between us. I heard it land. I felt the specific gravity of it, the way it reordered the shape of everything I had been thinking about since the Sunday of the folder and the cedar polish and my father's pen clicking twice in the quiet. I had been thinking in terms of family. I had been thinking about love and obligation and the kind of thing you did when you were the one in the family who could absorb more. I had been holding the whole situation inside a frame I had been handed when I was very young, a frame with my father's name on it, built from 32 years of believing that his judgment and my well-being were the same thing. Patrick had just told me to put down the frame and look at the evidence. He picked up his coffee and looked at me steadily. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet," I said, but something had moved. Something that had been holding in a particular position for the entire span of my life had shifted quietly in the break room of a hospital on a Tuesday morning, and I understood in the way that you understand things that cannot be undone, that I was not going to be able to put it back. I went to see my patients. I paid attention to each of them fully, the way I always did. I did the work. And that evening, for the first time, I sat at my kitchen table and thought about what I was actually willing to do. I was done waiting. 3 days later, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and wrote out everything I knew in order, the way I wrote differential diagnoses. The family meeting, the letter, the date 3 weeks before, the title filing, the photograph at the gala, Raymond's slip, the word timing. I read the list. Then I read it again. Then I drove to my parents' house on a Thursday morning, a day I knew my father held clinic at the hospital from 9 until 2. And I told my mother I had left a book in the study that I needed for a patient case. She said, "Of course, sweetheart, the coffee is fresh if you want some," and I said thank you and walked down the hall. The study was very still in the morning light, the diplomas on the wall, the framed quotation, the orderly desk. I stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at the room the way I had been looking at everything lately, trying to let it be what it actually was rather than what I had always understood it to mean. I crossed to the desk. I reached for the lower left drawer. It opened. I want to describe precisely the quality of that moment because I had been looking at that drawer my entire life, and the fact of it being unlocked was so unexpected that my hand went still on the handle for several seconds. He had forgotten. He had left in a hurry that morning, which was unusual for him, and the drawer sat open in my hand with the particular irreversibility of a thing that has already happened. There were 3 folders inside, each neatly labeled in my father's handwriting, which was very precise, the penmanship of a man who had been taught to write carefully and had never stopped. The first folder had my name on it. The second had a name I did not immediately recognize, Geraldine Foote. The third had a name I did recognize, Eleanor Marsh. I stood at the desk with the drawer open and looked at those 3 folders for a moment. Then I picked them up carefully, all 3, and I opened the first one, which was mine. It was the lender agreement, the full version, not the fragment that had slipped into my folder. All the pages, all the signatures, everything except the line at the bottom of the final page where my name was printed and the signature line beside it was blank. The agreement was otherwise fully executed. His signature was on it. The lending party's signature was on it. The date was there. The terms were there. The address of my property was there, described in the precise language of legal documents. The square footage and the parcel number and the assessed value and the current owner, which was me, whose agreement had been assumed from the beginning and whose blank signature line was the last outstanding detail in an arrangement that had been running without her for weeks. I set that folder down and I opened Eleanor's. What I found there took me longer to understand, not because it was complicated, but because my mind kept trying to fit it into a different shape than the one it actually had. There was a power of attorney document. Eleanor Marsh had granted power of attorney over a secondary property to an agent named Warren Price. The document was notarized and dated 2 years earlier, 11 months after her husband had died. The language described the arrangement as a convenience measure to assist a recently widowed individual in managing inherited assets she was not familiar with. It was written with the specific warmth of a document designed to feel like help. I thought about Eleanor at the pharmacy, her white hair and her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. The way she had said "he" is such a blessing without any hesitation. The way you say things you have said so many times, they have become the truest things you know. He's been helping me with the paperwork. You don't even know what you don't know. She had not known. She had trusted someone who knew exactly what she did not know and had positioned himself accordingly. I opened the third folder, Geraldine Foote, and found the same architecture in a different name. An older woman from the date of birth in the document. Another power of attorney. Another agent listed as Warren Price. Another arrangement described as assistance. I photographed all of it. I worked methodically and quickly, checking each frame to make sure the text was legible. The way I had learned to document things in the first months of residency, when I understood that careful records were the difference between a chart that held up and one that didn't. I replaced each folder in the drawer in the order I had found them. I closed the drawer. I heard the lock engage. I walked back down the hall to the kitchen. My mother was at the counter with her coffee and a magazine she had not been reading. "Find what you were looking for," she said. "I did," I said. "I stayed for 20 minutes. I drank her coffee and watched her face and thought about how much she knew and how much she did not know. I drove to the park near the hospital and sat in my car with the photographs I had just taken. I pressed record. I went through everything in order. The lender agreement fully executed except for my signature. Eleanor's folder. Geraldine Foote's folder. Warren Price named as agent in both. Warren Price, whose letterhead was on the document that had slipped into my folder, whose name had appeared in the gala photograph beside my father's, whose practice had been running for 22 years in a city where my father had been practicing for 31. I was not the first. I was the latest. The others had gone through. Both arrangements had completed, which was why he had been so confident, why he had submitted the file in before the meeting, why he had scheduled the conversation rather than initiated it. He had not considered, in 32 years of knowing me, that there was a version of me that looked at evidence rather than at him. "I am not going to let him take my house," I said into the phone. My voice was very level. "And I am not going to let him do this to Eleanor." I stopped the recording. I pressed my thumb into the inside of my left wrist. My pulse was there, the way it always was. I called a real estate attorney. Her name was Susan Bellamy. Recommended when I bought the house. A woman with a precise manner on the phone who waited until she had heard everything before she said anything. I told her about the title filing. I told her there was a preliminary transfer notification on my property submitted without my knowledge or consent. She was quiet for a moment. "When was the filing submitted?" I told her. "And you have had no communication with a title company prior to receiving the notification?" "None," I said. "All right. I can file an injunction to halt the transfer pending your review. That blocks any further processing until this is resolved. I can have that moving by the end of the week." "Please do that," I said. I drove to the county recorder's office. The clerk was back in 4 minutes with a printout. Eleanor's primary residence, as expected, and a secondary parcel, a small plot of land in the county's eastern district, inherited after her husband's death. The current record showed a power of attorney notation on the secondary parcel. The agent of record was Warren Price. Eleanor's parcel. Geraldine's arrangement. My house. 3 properties. 3 people. 1 attorney threading through all of them, quiet and unremarkable and very hard to find if you did not already know where to look. I found Nora Marsh through a professional directory. 1. Nora Marsh in the metropolitan area at a firm 40 miles away, listed as a senior paralegal in estate and probate. I looked at that title for a moment. Estate and probate. She worked in exactly the field her mother had been manipulated through, which meant she would understand what I was about to tell her more clearly and more completely than most people would. I composed the email 3 times before I sent it, removing words the way you remove words when you understand that less is more likely to be trusted than more. By the final version, it was 5 sentences. I told her I was the daughter of her mother's physician. I told her I had come across information about her mother's financial arrangements that I believed she would want to know. I told her I would prefer to speak privately rather than in writing. I left my hospital phone number and my name. I pressed send. That evening I added to the list the full lender agreement, Eleanor's folder, Geraldine's folder, Warren Price's agent, the county recorder's notation, Susan Bellamy's injunction. Nora Marsh, contacted, waiting. It had been a record of what had been done to me. Now it was the beginning of something else. I closed the legal pad and went to bed and slept without interruption for the first time in 2 weeks. Susan Bellamy called Monday. The injunction was ready. She would file the following morning. I told her to proceed. The next morning I was in a patient consultation when it went through. A 67-year-old man who deserved my full attention. I gave it to him. The satisfaction of doing the work correctly. That was something my father had not given me and could not take from me. I checked my phone at lunch. There was a missed call from my father. No voicemail. I put the phone in my coat pocket and went back to work. Raymond contacted me 2 days after the injunction filed. He sent a text, which was unusual for him. Can we meet? Not a question. The punctuation made it something more deliberate. He drove 4 hours. He did not tell me he was coming until he was already 2 hours into the drive. A text at a rest stop that said, I'm on my way. I finished my shift and got to the coffee shop near my hospital that I liked because it was loud enough to be private. He was there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table, a cup of coffee in front of him that he had not drunk much of. His jacket still on. He looked like someone who had been carrying something for a while and had finally decided to put it down somewhere specific. He stood when he saw me. He said my name the way he always said it, kid, and then sat back down and folded his hands on the table and looked at them for a moment before looking at me. I know some things, he said. I have known some of them for a long time. I told myself they were not my business. I'm not sure I believe that, but I told myself, and it's easier to keep telling yourself something than to decide you were wrong. He picked up his coffee cup and set it down without drinking. When I called you and said what I said about Martin having a lot on his plate, I knew right away that I shouldn't have said it, and then I kept thinking about the fact that I almost hadn't, that I almost kept it in, the way I had kept everything else in. I waited. Warren Price drafted the documents, Raymond said, the power of attorney arrangements, for both women, your father's patients. He said the words carefully, each one set down precisely. Martin was the informal benefiting party in both. The arrangements were structured in a way that gave Warren authority over certain assets, and the financial decisions that came from that authority served Martin's practice, indirectly, nothing that would show up cleanly in a direct audit, but there nonetheless. He looked up at me. I know that because Martin asked me to witness a document signing 8 years ago. He said it was a routine estate matter for a patient. I signed as witness. I did not read what I was witnessing. He stopped. I read it afterward when I understood enough to be curious. I made a copy. I kept it. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and placed a folded sheet of paper flat on the table between us. I looked at it. I did not touch it yet. Raymond, I said, why didn't you say anything at the time? He looked at the table. Because he is my brother. Because I was not certain enough. Because it was easier to decide that I had misunderstood what I was looking at. A long pause. All the wrong reasons. I know that. I am not asking you to think well of me for this. I picked up the document. It was a copy, the paper dry and slightly creased from years in a drawer. A power of attorney addendum connected to an arrangement I recognized from the papers I had photographed in my father's study. Warren Price appeared as the drafting attorney. My father's name appeared in a section describing the management of returns on a certain class of asset transfer. The language was careful and indirect. But it was there. I folded it and put it in my bag. Thank you, I said. He nodded. He looked tired in the specific way that people looked when they had done something they should have done years ago and understood the weight of the years. What are you going to do? He said. What needs to be done, I said. Raymond's document was the one piece of the structure I could not have found on my own. Nora Marsh called me on a Thursday evening 6 days after I had sent the email. Dr. Hale, she said. Her voice was measured and professional. This is Nora Marsh. I'm returning your email. Thank you for calling, I said. I know this was an unusual message. It was, she said. I want to be honest with you. I verified your credentials before I called. I know your father has been my mother's physician for many years. My mother thinks very highly of him. I know, I said. I've seen that. What do you know about her financial arrangements? The question was direct, the question of a paralegal who understood that how you asked a thing determined what you got back. I told her what I knew. Warren Price holding power of attorney over a secondary property her mother had inherited, his professional relationship with my father predating the arrangement by a significant margin, documentation suggesting the arrangements had benefited my father's practice in ways not disclosed to either woman. Nora was quiet. The silence had the quality of someone who has been looking for something for a long time and has just been told where to look. I have been trying to trace 3 withdrawals from my mother's secondary account, she said. Small amounts, spaced about 3 years apart. My mother cannot account for them and has no memory of initiating them. I thought at first it was administrative error. She stopped. Are you telling me these withdrawals are connected to Warren Price? I believe so, I said. I can share the documentation I have with you. Yes, she said. I want to see it. Her voice had a different quality now, the thing that lives in the voice when you have been told something that changes the shape of a story you have been telling yourself for a long time. She asked precise, intelligent questions. She did not express outrage. She processed the information the way someone processed it when they had been trained to receive difficult facts without letting the difficulty interfere with understanding. I will need to discuss this with my mother, she said at the end, and I will need to talk to my firm's attorneys. I work in estate and probate. I know what this looks like. I thought you might, I said. My father called 3 days later at 8 in the evening. Claire, he said. His voice had its usual register, calm and warm and entirely in control of the space it occupied. I've been thinking about you. I've been here, I said. A brief pause. Have you been talking to someone about the property situation? I've been handling some things, I said. He was quiet for a moment. Not the comfortable quiet of a man who was thinking. A different kind of quiet, the kind that happened when someone was recalibrating. I want to say something to you, he said, and I want you to really hear it. What we are asking as a family is a matter of love. It is a matter of choosing your sister over a piece of real estate. I know you understand that intellectually. I am asking you to feel it. His voice stayed level throughout. Not a single fluctuation. I also want to say that I hope you understand that some things, once started, are difficult to stop. Processes have momentum. I would not want you to find yourself on the wrong side of something because you misunderstood the timeline. I heard the word momentum. I heard the word timeline. I let them sit in the air without responding to them directly. I understand, I said. Another pause. Longer. You don't sound like yourself. I'm tired, I said. Long week. Of course. Get some rest. We'll talk soon. Good night, Dad. I hung up. I looked at my phone for a moment. Then I pressed record and played back the call. And I listened to his voice, the momentum and the timeline and the wrong side of something. And I thought about a man who was accustomed to things going the way he arranged them and was beginning to understand that this one had not. I did not need the recording. I kept it anyway. I set the phone on the table and looked at the ceiling for a while. The familiar white of my own kitchen ceiling, the small water stain near the light fixture that I had been meaning to address since the first winter and had never gotten to. My house. The one he had assumed I would hand over. The one whose preliminary transfer paperwork had been filed before. He had the courtesy of asking because he had done this before and it had worked before, and he had believed. In the particular, unexamined way he believed most things about me, that I would be no different than the others. He was beginning to understand that he had made an error in that calculation. He could feel something had shifted, but he could not locate the source of it, could not see clearly enough to know how much had already moved. He would find out soon enough. Nora called me back on a Tuesday, 11 days after our first conversation. I was between patients when my phone buzzed on my desk with her number, and I stepped into the hallway to take it because I had been expecting her call, and I wanted to be somewhere I could listen without interruption. "I've talked to my mother," she said. "I've talked to the attorneys at my firm. And I've made a decision." She had spent the intervening days going through her mother's financial records in a way she had never gone through them before. She had found the 3 withdrawals, all small, all authorized by an agent rather than by Eleanor herself, all traceable through the power of attorney to decisions made on Eleanor's behalf that Eleanor had no memory of being consulted about. She had found a 4th withdrawal she had not previously noticed. Older, 5 years back, smaller than the others, the kind of transaction that disappeared easily in a full year of statements if you were not looking for it specifically. 4 transactions, spanning 9 years, each one authorized by Warren Price, each one serving, in ways that would require professional examination to fully document, a financial relationship between Warren Price and my father's practice. "I'm filing a complaint with the state medical board," Nora said. "My firm is helping me draft it. It will name my mother as the injured party, and it will name Warren Price as an associated party, and it will include the documentation you shared with me along with what I found in my mother's records." A pause. "I want you to know that my mother has agreed to this. She did not agree easily, but she agreed." I thought about Eleanor agreeing, about what it had cost her to look at the face of a man she had called a blessing and understand that the blessing had been a strategy. "She asked me to thank you," Nora said. "She didn't want to call herself yet. She's not ready, but she wanted you to know." We spoke for a few more minutes about the timeline, about how slowly these things moved. When we hung up, I stood in the hallway for a moment and thought about Eleanor and how well I understood exactly how she felt. Within 2 weeks of Nora's filing, I learned about it through Susan Bellamy on a Thursday afternoon. "The board investigation is open," she said. "The lender arrangement referencing your property will come under that scrutiny as part of the review. I'd expect the preliminary transfer filing to be effectively suspended pending the outcome, on top of the injunction." "And my father knows the investigation is open?" I said. "He would have received notice. It's a formal process." "He knows." She mentioned one other thing before we hung up. She had reviewed the lender agreement in full, and there was a section she wanted me to know about: the co-signing of my medical school loans. The arrangement my father had mentioned at the family table as a proof of love appeared in the document as context for the collateral arrangement. Martin had told the lender that our financial histories were entangled. He had used the cosign as evidence that I was connected to his financial life in a way that made the arrangement credible. He had not asked for my love at that table. He had used it as a credit reference. I thought about my father receiving that notice, the face he wore when he was managing versus the face he wore when he was genuinely present. I thought he probably wore the managing face even when he was alone. The hospital called him in the same week. His hospital privileges were placed under review pending the board investigation. He was asked not to see patients at Mercy General while the review was in process. He retained his private practice, the home office visits, the long-term patients who did not go through the hospital system. 2 of those long-term patients requested their files be transferred to another physician within days of the news becoming generally known. I heard about that through the informal channels of people who worked together every day and paid attention. I did not seek the information. It found me the way things found you in a city where you had lived long enough. My father did not call me for a week and a half after the board notice. I noticed the silence the way you noticed the absence of a sound you had become accustomed to, the way the house felt different after the heat clicked off. And then on a Saturday morning, my doorbell rang at 8:45. I was in my kitchen with coffee, still in the soft gray sweatshirt I had owned since medical school, the one I wore on mornings when I needed the comfort of something familiar. I went to the front window and looked out before I answered the door, a habit I had developed in the past weeks without noticing I had developed it. My parents' car was at the curb, both of them. I went to the front door and opened it and stepped out onto the porch. and I stood at the top of the porch steps and looked at my parents standing outside the gate at the end of my front path. My father looked like himself. That was the thing I noticed first, and it unsettled me more than I expected. He was in the good coat, the dark wool one he wore when he wanted to look considered rather than casual, his posture correct, his expression exactly what it had always been. My mother stood slightly behind him and to his left, her hands clasped in front of her, wearing a coat I recognized from many years of Sunday dinners. The gate between us was closed. He had not opened it. "Claire," he said, his voice carried across the small front yard with its usual evenness, "we'd like to talk." I looked at him. I looked at my mother. I looked at the gate, which was wrought iron, and which I had painted myself the first summer I lived here, choosing the color carefully, a dark green that looked like something that had been there a long time. "All right," I said. I did not open the gate. I did not come down the steps. He understood that I was not going to invite them in, and there was a flicker of something in his face that was not quite the managing expression, and not quite the present one. Something between them that I did not have a name for. "I know there are things happening," he said. "I know there are processes in motion that are causing difficulty. I want you to understand that none of what is happening was intended to harm you. None of it was intended to harm anyone. Everything that was done from a place of trying to manage a complicated situation for the family." "I know you believe that," I said. "Then you understand." He opened his hands, the same gesture from the Saturday dinner table, the gesture of reasonableness. "There is still time to address this in a way that works for everyone. The investigation is in early stages. These things are correctable if approached correctly. What I need from you is to step back from whatever you are involved in and let this be handled privately, the way these things should be handled." My mother took a small step forward. "Sweetheart, we love you. We are standing here because we love you, and we are asking you to remember that." I looked at them both for a moment. I pressed my thumb into the inside of my left wrist. My pulse was there, even, the same. "You taught me something," I said to my father. "You said it to me so many times that I wrote it down when I was in high school. A good person does the right thing, even when it is hard." He watched me through the gate. "I spent a long time trying to figure out what the right thing was," I said. "I kept thinking about the family, about Brianna, about everything you said about sacrifice and love, and what it meant to be the one who could hold more. I thought about it for weeks. I couldn't sleep. I stopped for a moment. And then I stopped thinking about what you needed me to think, and I started looking at what was actually in front of me. The document with the date, 3 weeks before you asked, Eleanor's folder, Geraldine's folder, the photograph of you and Warren Price at the gala, Raymond's document." I said each thing quietly and without emphasis. I was not performing the list. I was just saying what I knew. I found what was there to be found. I told the people who needed to know, and I stopped protecting a story that was not true. My father's face had gone very still, not the managing stillness. Something deeper and less controlled. My mother had a hand over her mouth. "You taught me to do the right thing," I said. "Even when it is hard, I am finally doing it." I held his eyes for a moment. Then I turned and went back inside my house. I did not move quickly. I closed the door behind me and stood in my front hallway in my old gray sweatshirt, and I listened. I heard my father's voice, low, saying something to my mother that I could not make out. I heard the gate, the small sound of it closing. I heard the car door, and then the engine, and then nothing. I stood in the hallway for a long time. The house was very quiet around me. The coffee was on the kitchen counter, still warm. The rosebush was outside the window, the same as it had always been. I did not feel the way I had expected to feel. I had imagined the moment of confrontation many times in the past weeks, had imagined something large and clarifying, a door open to a room full of light. What I felt instead was smaller and more exact. Not relief exactly, something closer to the feeling at the end of a very long shift, when the last patient has been seen and the charts are complete and the work is done and you can finally sit down. It was enough. It was, in fact, exactly enough. 2 weeks passed. I went to work every morning. I did my rounds. I saw my patients and I paid attention to them, and I did the work carefully and well. The investigation moved through its early stages without my direct involvement. Susan Bellamy sent periodic updates. Nora and I exchanged brief emails when there was something to exchange. And then, on a Thursday evening, a little after 7, my phone rang with Nora's number. "My mother wants to talk to you," she said. I sat down. "She has been hearing things," Nora continued. "In her neighborhood, at church. People saying things about Dr. Hale that she doesn't know what to do with. She called me last night and she said she needed to ask someone who knew, directly. She said she needed to know if what she was hearing was true." "What did you tell her?" I said. "I told her I thought she should hear it from you," Nora said. "If you're willing." I said I was willing. Nora put her mother on the phone. Eleanor Marsh's voice was older on the phone than it had seemed at the pharmacy, or perhaps I was simply paying a different kind of attention now. She said my name with the warmth she always had, the warmth that came from associating me with my father, with the family she had trusted, and then she said, "I need to know if it's true. What people are saying about Martin. I need someone to tell me plainly." I sat at my kitchen table. Outside the window, the evening light was long and flat across the yard. "Yes," I said, "it's true. I did not say it dramatically. I did not frame it. I said what I knew. I said it clearly and without embellishment, and I let it be what it was." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. "For how long?" she said. "A long time," I said. "I think a very long time." Another silence. Then she said quietly to herself as much as to me, "He seemed like such a good man." "He seemed like that to me too," I said, "my whole life." We stayed on the phone for 11 minutes. She asked several questions and I answered them honestly. At the end, she thanked me in a voice that was not the warm voice from the pharmacy, but something rawer and more real. I told her I was sorry. I meant it in the way you meant it when the sorry was not an apology but an acknowledgement of something that had cost someone more than it should have. When we hung up, I set the phone on the kitchen table and sat there for a long time. The room went gradually darker as the evening came on. I did not turn on the lights. The thing I was sitting with was not a problem to be solved. It was simply something that had happened, that was true, that was now in the world in the way that true things were once you stopped protecting them from it. After a while, I got up and turned on the kitchen light and put the kettle on and stood at the window while it boiled. The rose bush was still there, still mine, still exactly where I had put it. The investigation did not announce itself to the community. What my father had been protected by for 30 years was regard, the kind that deflected scrutiny before scrutiny could form into anything specific. It required maintenance. His wife at the right events, his daughter at the right gatherings, people saying without being asked, "What a good man, what a fine family." I had been part of that maintenance without knowing it. The billing questions I had explained away, the patient's concerns I had absorbed, all of it had been maintenance. I had been a structural element in a story that was not true, and the story had held because I had helped it hold. I stopped helping it hold. That was all I did. I simply stopped, and in the months after the board investigation opened, I watched what happened when the maintenance stopped. It moved the way cold moved through a house when the heat was off. The church deacon's seat was not renewed, the committee simply did not put his name forward, and no one asked why. The hospital gala invitations went out in October. He did not receive one. I did not attend either. His private practice contracted. Not all at once, not dramatically, but consistently, the way a tide went out, each week leaving slightly less than the week before. 6 patients transferred their records to other physicians in the 3 months following the suspension. Then 3 more. The patients who stayed were the ones who had known him the longest and were not yet ready to question what they had decided he was. And even some of them called the office to ask careful questions they had not asked before, questions about billing and procedures and the management of their files, questions that would not have been asked in a different season. He was not convicted. The board investigation was ongoing. Warren Price had retained attorneys. The lender arrangement had been formally withdrawn. My house remained mine. Eleanor's and Geraldine's arrangements were a separate matter, and that was not in my hands. What was in my hands was already done. My mother called me twice in the 6 weeks after the gate. The first call came on a Sunday afternoon, the kind of Sunday that had once meant my parents' house and the cedar polish smell and my father's pen and the ritual of a family that believed in its own coherence. She cried. She cried in the way she did things quietly and without theater, and she told me that she did not understand how things had come to this. that she did not understand why I had chosen to handle something personal in such a public way, that she did not understand what I had hoped to accomplish. I listened to all of it. I did not argue with any of it. "I hope you're okay, Mom," I said. "I mean that." She was quiet for a moment. "You always say you mean things," she said. It was not a compliment. It was not a compliment. It was the observation of a woman who was trying to understand her daughter and could not find the entry point. "I know," I said. The second call came 2 weeks later. Her voice had the quality of someone who had decided that tears had not worked and was trying something else. She told me that my father was a good man who had made errors in judgment, that errors in judgment were not crimes, that the people who were suffering because of what I had set in motion were people who had loved me. "I know," I said. "Then how can you just let it keep going?" I thought about Eleanor Marsh, about Geraldine Foote, whose name I knew only from a folder, whose face I had never seen, whose trust had been organized into a document and used. I thought about the 4 withdrawals in Eleanor's secondary account, authorized on her behalf by someone she had chosen to believe because my father had introduced them, and my father's recommendation had been, for 20 years, a form of guarantee, because stopping it required letting it start, I said. "I'm not the one who made it a public thing, Mom. I'm the one who found out it was already one." She said goodbye. Her voice was tired, the way a voice got tired when it had been carrying something heavy for a long time and was not yet ready to put it down but was beginning to understand the weight. Brianna did not call. The silence was simply quiet. The way the space left by something removed is simply the shape of what was gone. She was 29 years old and she had been told her whole life that her life was someone else's responsibility. The slow punishment of becoming an adult was already in motion. I thought about her once, the half second at the family table, her face showing the things she knew, then looking away. I thought about that once and let it go. Raymond called in late November. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Martin called me last week. He asked me if I had said anything to anyone." I held the phone and waited. "I told him no," Raymond said. "He said it plainly, without apology or defense. And then I called you as soon as we hung up. I want you to know that." "I know," I said. "I should have told you immediately when he called. I should have called you while he was still on the line." He stopped. "I'm sorry I waited as long as I did. On all of it. I'm sorry I kept telling myself it wasn't my business when I knew better." I was quiet for a moment. Outside my window, the yard was bare in the November light, the rose bush cut back for the winter, the soil dark and turned. I had done that myself the previous weekend, following the instructions in a book I had bought when I planted it, doing each step the way the book described. "Raymond," I said, "it's not entirely fine. I want to be honest with you. There were years when it would have helped to know what you knew. There were people who were hurt in those years, and some of what happened might have been different." I stopped. "But you came forward when I needed you to. You drove 4 hours and you sat across from me and you gave me the document. I don't know if I could have gotten to the other side of this without that piece. So it's not fine, but it's enough. That's the best I can offer you, and I mean it." He was quiet for a long moment. "That's fair," he said. "We talked for a few more minutes the way we always had, and then we said goodbye. The morning I am thinking of now came in early December. A weekday, a Tuesday, the kind of morning that winter in this city made gray and particular, the light coming through the kitchen window at a low angle that turned everything the color of something considered. I was at the kitchen table with coffee. The house was quiet in the specific way. It was quiet on mornings when nothing was required of it yet, when the day had not started asking for anything. I had been awake for 20 minutes. My scrubs were on the chair by the door. I had a 7 o'clock start and it was 10 past 6. I picked up my phone. I opened the voice memo app. The list was there. 23 recordings going back to the Sunday of the family meeting. The first one made in the driveway of this house with the folder on the passenger seat and the porch light on. I scrolled through them without playing any. I knew what was in each one because I had been in each one, had been the person thinking through the problem in real time, talking to herself the way she talked through difficult cases, the way she had learned to do in the first year of residency when she understood that her own voice could help her think if she let it. I pressed play on the first recording. My voice came out of the phone the way I had sounded 4 months ago, tentative and careful, feeling out the shape of the thing I was describing. Just left my parents. There was a meeting. Dad asked me to give Brianna my house. I listened to 30 seconds of it. My voice paused at the end of a sentence, and in the pause was the particular quality of someone who was still deciding whether to be alarmed. I stopped the recording. I closed the app. I set the phone on the table. I sat for a moment with my coffee and looked out at the yard. The rosebush was cut back to its winter shape, compact and bare and waiting for spring. In the spring, it would come back, the way it had come back every year, reliable and exact, because I had planted it correctly and tended it correctly and given it what it needed, and it had no reason not to return. The yard was mine, the house was mine, the morning was mine. I pressed my thumb into the inside of my left wrist, briefly, without urgency. My pulse was there, even and steady, the way it always was. I did not need to check it. I checked it anyway because it was a habit I had kept and had no interest in breaking, a small reliable practice, a way of knowing that the thing at the center of everything was simply going. I got up. I put the coffee mug in the sink. I picked up my keys. He did not teach me to be good. He taught me to be useful. It took me 32 years to learn the difference and about 4 months to act on it. I went to work.